welcome to today's video. We are going to be talking about the most common deficiencies that I see, vitamins and minerals in the clients that I work with. Now, why is this so important? I think that a lot of people are like, oh, I care more about my hormonal imbalances. If you are deficient in certain vitamins, minerals, and your nutrient status is depleted, that leads to hormonal imbalances. That leads to long-term chronic health conditions. And if we can just replenish certain vitamins and minerals, we're able to actually reverse certain conditions. So it is so critical that we are getting the majority of the vitamins and minerals that we need from our food. And if we are not meeting the criteria for things that we need, or we are depleted because of certain medications that we have taken in the past, or maybe current medication use, we are replenishing those vitamins and minerals so that we're not causing further symptoms for ourselves, so we're not causing further imbalances for ourselves. And so where I want to start this with you guys is I want to talk a little bit about, I actually heard on a podcast recently, I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Josh Axe, who I find so fascinating, and he was saying there's not one prescription medication out there on the market that doesn't cause a vitamin or mineral deficiency, which is so fascinating. And when you look at a lot of the data and the research out there, you really start to see that this is true. And you guys have probably heard me talk a lot about how the birth control depletes certain vitamins and minerals, right? The birth control pill is depleting you of certain B vitamins, B6, B12, folate. It is depleting you of zinc and magnesium. All of these things are essential. Magnesium is needed for you to be able to cope with stress and to sleep and to have regular bowel movements. Zinc is needed for your thyroid function. That's oftentimes why we hear people saying birth control pill use over the long term can actually be related to thyroid issues. It's at least one of the reasons why, and because of B vitamin depletion. When we think about things like protein pump inhibitors and antacids and how they affect your gut health, a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm just going to do this, short term to help me deal with my heartburn. You're also depleting calcium, magnesium, iron. You're depleting all of these different minerals that your body desperately needs for energy and so many different functions. When you think about long-term use of things like diuretics, you are depleting minerals like potassium and magnesium that are totally necessary for fluid balance in the body and for energy levels. When you are using a statin long-term, you're depleting CoQ10, which is absolutely needed for longevity and anti-aging. When you are on antibiotics long-term, you are depleting vitamin K and B12. Not only that, you are severely messing with the good gut bacteria that you have. And so all of these different medications, again, are going to have an impact on your vitamin and mineral status. And so if you cannot not be on these things, you really have to consider doing a whole complete vitamin and mineral panel so you can see where you might be deficient and where things are off so that you can supplement appropriately and properly, because you don't also want to be taking things that you don't necessarily need. And so supplementing with the right things at the right times in the right amounts and working with a practitioner to do that is really, really important. So speaking of all of those things, what are the most common deficiencies that I start to see in my clients? Well, number one is iron. And this is really normal and common because there are a lot of women out there who are having heavy, painful periods. And when we lose a lot of blood, we're losing iron. And so when you have heavy periods because of something like estrogen dominance or hypothyroidism or a combination of those two things, you are losing more iron than the average woman. And then you may start having symptoms of things like fatigue, brain fog, really hard time concentrating, craving things like red meat. And that is a sign to your body that you should be replenishing those iron stores. Again, whether that is through food or through a supplement. A lot of clients that I see actually end up needing an iron supplement on top of just doing it with food because for a very long time they have depleted these stores and they need to be able to refill and refuel until once again they can just get their iron stores replenished from food. And This isn't something where it should be like this. If you're having normal, healthy periods, it's actually not necessarily normal to be having an iron deficiency. This is, again, very common when you have estrogen dominance and your periods are super, super heavy. The next thing that I see oftentimes with women is a vitamin D deficiency and a calcium deficiency. Now, this is so important for the sake of your long-term bone health, right? When we think about women in, their 60s and 70s getting like hip fractures or breaking a bone, oftentimes it's because going through menopause and depleting those calcium stores, and vitamin D comes along with that. But I will tell you, I often see women in my practice who are in their 20s with really low or suboptimal vitamin D. Your vitamin D level should be somewhere between 60 and 80, and if it is below that, you are suboptimal. Now, your vitamin D isn't just impacting your bone health, it's also impacting your brain health, your immune system, your metabolic function. And so check your vitamin D levels, because so many of us spend so much time indoors. We don't go outside even half as often as we do anymore, especially in the fall and winter months. And there are other hormones that are needed and hormones and nutrients to regulate the absorption of vitamin D. So you want to make sure your vitamin D levels are optimal. So the next thing that you want to think about is looking at your folate levels. Now, this is something that can be off for a lot of women, especially because 40% of the population has a hard time methylating folate because we have the MTHFR genetic mutation. I personally have 2 copies of each mutation. And like I said, there's literally a 4 in 10 chance that you have this genetic mutation that makes it harder for you to convert folate or folic acid into what's usable for your body. And so why is this important? It's especially important for women who are of childbearing age. Like for me in this pregnancy, I've had to take a methylated form of folate so that my levels were high enough, because if you have either the MTHFR genetic mutation or you don't have a good enough amount of folate and you get pregnant, this can cause neural tube defects with your baby, especially in early pregnancy. So you want to make sure, especially if you're trying to conceive, that you're looking at your folate levels. Another really common one, especially for women who are on a vegetarian or vegan diet, is a B12 deficiency. So if you are deficient in B12, it is going to make you feel like you are weak, like you cannot think straight, like you don't have a ton of energy, like you don't really want to go work out, you're not super motivated. And like I said, this is really common in people who are vegan and vegetarian because it's very hard to get B12 from plant-based sources, especially if you don't eat eggs. It can be near next to impossible. And so checking your B12 levels if you're super low energy is going to be really important. And then the last really common deficiency that I see, especially in women who have had a disordered relationship with food in the past, who struggle and have been chronically dieting, is low omega fatty acids. And so this is often going to show up as weak or brittle hair, weak or brittle nails, and like kind of dull, gray, not glowy skin. Oftentimes this low omega content can also impact your mood, making you feel really irritable and kind of cranky. And so if you're like, oh, I've done all my lab work and I'm not hypothyroid, I am not dealing with a hormonal imbalance, but I have this like hair loss and my hair isn't growing in thick enough, you want to look at your omega content. And this is why I think that like doing these vitamin and mineral panels as a part of a holistic lab review is really, really important, because maybe you don't have a hormonal imbalance yet, but you are nutrient deficient, which could down the line lead to a hormonal imbalance. And so knowing your nutrient status, knowing what you're taking in, and knowing where you can adjust your diet and your supplements to optimize these things is really, really valuable. I hope that this video was helpful. Please comment and let us know what you want to see talked about next when it comes to your health and hormones, and we will see you next week.